My parents, brother, and fiancé were all convinced that environment has nothing to do with character. So they sent both me and the fake heiress into a newly developed time machine, letting us live each other's lives. If she could still shine in harsh conditions, they'd completely abandon me. Honestly, I was also curious, what would a pampered socialite do if she suddenly couldn't even afford a meal? Chapter 1. Once seated in the time machine, the host carefully placed a helmet on my head. Across from me, Julia, the so-called fake heiress, raised her brows smugly. That classic switched-at-birth plotline from rich family dramas? It was playing out on us. And unfortunately, I was the real daughter who had been mistakenly taken by the nanny. While I was getting beaten by my foster parents, Julia was twirling in fancy dresses at her international school, preparing to study abroad. When I went out alone to sell junk just to scrape together tuition, she was throwing money around at her lavish birthday party. Then one day, a routine school-wide physical revealed Julia's blood type didn't match her family. Only then did they realize there had been a terrible mix-up. My parents searched high and low and finally found me, only to recoil when they saw me dragging a sack of garbage. They brought me home, stuffed me in the maid's room, and yet, they made no move to send Julia away. I asked, confused, "Why is she still here?" Julia's eyes immediately reddened. "If Big Sis doesn't like me, I'll leave. I know there's no place for me in this home." That one line sent the whole family into a frenzy. My so-called biological parents and brother all rushed to comfort her, even shooting me accusatory glares. I knew if I didn't speak up now, I might never get the chance again, so I calmly said, "Shall I remind you? I wasn't accidentally switched, I was deliberately replaced. The life she's enjoyed these past years was supposed to be mine. If you keep her now, are you saying anyone can rewrite fate through deceit?" But my well-dressed brother slammed down his chopsticks and snapped, "I've called Julia my sister for so many years. I don't care about blood or switch-ups. The only sister I recognize is her. If someone's leaving, it's you." I looked at this insane family and shook my head, ready to return to my wandering, lonely life. But my father stopped me. With a serious expression, he said, "Enough. You're fighting over who stays, right? In our home, we only keep those with upright character." Coincidentally, the company just finished building a time machine. If either of you can thrive in the other's life, we'll keep the winner. Neither Julia nor I objected, we both nodded. But I knew better than anyone, this fair competition was anything but. Julia had years of elite education. Meanwhile, I had to step into high society wearing the label of a poor village girl. Too bad, they underestimated me. A typical rural life might have been simple, but my foster home certainly wasn't. Let's see what Julia does when the tuition she scraped together from selling scraps gets stolen. Soon, the experiment day arrived. The company's new product was being tested for the first time. And what better test subjects than the real and fake heiresses themselves? Such a juicy marketing angle, my birth father wasn't about to waste it. Cameras were placed all around us. As the current surged through the helmet, the live broadcast began. Chapter 2. The first to have her consciousness extracted was Julia. The giant screen flickered into darkness. I knew that meant her mind was now being transferred into my past memories. Meanwhile, the host turned to my birth mother and asked, "Madam, who do you think will win this challenge?" My mother tilted her chin high, her face brimming with pride. She tried to sound modest, but her tone betrayed her bias. "Although Julia isn't my biological daughter," she said, "I trust her character. No matter how harsh the environment, I believe she'll rise to the top." She didn't choose sides directly, but her favoritism couldn't be more obvious. My birth father, brother, and fiancé all nodded in agreement, but I felt nothing. After all those years of hardship, I had already grown numb. So what if I didn't get love from my family? That alone was hardly worth fretting over. Comments flooded the live stream. I glanced over. The bullet chat on the screen was flooded with praise for Julia. "Our Lady Julia is talented in everything: piano, chess, calligraphy, painting. A little rural life? That's child's play." Exactly. It's like sending a maxed-out character to a beginner's village. I just shook my head. They were seriously underestimating how cruel my foster mother could be. Then, Julia's consciousness finally synced. The big screen lit up, revealing a dilapidated little hut. The wooden table was filthy. The quilts were patched and worn. and even the color tone of the footage looked gray and hopeless. Little Julia, who now looked about 5 or 6, stood dumbfounded in the middle of the room, clearly still disoriented. But before she could get her bearings, smack! A broom landed hard across her back. She fell to the ground instantly. The broom's wielder, a fierce-looking woman, snarled, "You worthless brat! I told you to cut pigweed, and you're just standing there? You want another beating, don't you?" Another smack came down. The audience and my birth parents gasped in shock and pity. So the real daughter lived in this kind of hell? That woman's a monster. How can she hit a kid that small? Ugh. Typical backwoods scum. No wonder the real daughter ended up so unpleasant. But Julia's different. She's a lotus blooming out of mud, untouched by filth. I heard them, but simply smiled and said nothing. Julia, grimacing in pain, got up quickly and carried a basket larger than herself up the mountain to gather weeds. Unfortunately, she still clung to her old habits as a pampered heiress. Her hands, soft and delicate from years of piano, blistered badly after pulling just a few weeds. Even after working until nightfall, she couldn't fill the basket. She returned home, dejected and empty-handed. Her foster mother took one look at the pitiful load and exploded in rage. "That's all you picked? If you dare slack off again tomorrow, I'll skin you alive." She then threw a dirty little bowl in front of Julia with a scowl. "Eat up, you good-for-nothing." Julia looked embarrassed. Her upbringing made her instinctively repulsed by the filthy bowl, but after an exhausting day, she had no choice but to sit down and chew slowly. She ate every last grain of rice, and still wasn't full. Nervously, she looked up at the woman. "I'm still hungry," she whispered. Slap! The woman struck her again. "Hungry, hungry. That's all you know. Didn't even work much but sure got an appetite. Get lost." The foster mother's cruelty finally sparked outrage from the audience. But I just smiled. That was nothing, and she still had over 10 years of this ahead. Chapter 3. Seeing the faint smile on my lips, my so-called business elite brother glared at me with resentment. "How can you be so heartless? Your sister is getting beaten like that, and you're still smiling?" The audience below nodded in agreement at his words, as if I had somehow become accomplice to my abusive foster mother. They began directing their outrage at me. I merely shrugged helplessly. I mean, technically, I've already lived the exact same life she's experiencing now. How does that count as me mocking her? And besides, Julia's real mother is my foster mother. Isn't she? So in a way, this life was always meant for her. My brother was caught off guard and speechless. He tried to argue back, but was soon distracted by what was happening on the screen. There were always endless chores in my foster mother's home. Herding cattle, cutting weeds, cleaning the house, harvesting rice. But in her own life, Julia had only ever learned piano, chess, calligraphy, and painting. She knew nothing of physical labor. Every day, she failed to complete the chores, and ended up getting chased and beaten all over the house. The same audience that once gushed about Julia's gracefulness had now fallen silent. All they could do was try to save face. Well, under such conditions, it's understandable if she can't keep up her poise. At least she's morally upright. But their self-soothing didn't last long. Julia couldn't handle the daily grind, especially while going hungry, and when she caught sight of her foster mother sneaking a bite of a big, juicy chicken drumstick, she finally snapped. Late at night, she crept into the kitchen and stole it. She devoured it ravenously, almost like a starving animal. Naturally, she got caught. Her foster mother beat her half to death with a rattan cane, leaving scars so deep they'd never fully fade. Those who had just praised her purity suddenly fell silent. Some fidgeted awkwardly, rubbing their hands together. One day, the foster mother told Julia to light the stove and cook. Julia tossed in a whole heap of firewood, but no matter what she did, the flames wouldn't catch. Afraid of being beaten, she panicked and kept throwing in more coal. That's when I finally spoke. She shouldn't be doing it that way. My fiancé immediately frowned in disapproval. What's your problem? You want her to get beaten? That crazy woman will lash out again if the stove's not lit. I simply shook my head without replying. Moments later, the foster mother entered and saw the cold stove. With barely a glance, she kicked Julia violently. "Useless girl, Always wasting things. Can't even light a fire properly. Only then did I explain. You're supposed to use lit paper as kindling first. Otherwise, you'll never get the fire going and just waste coal. The host gave me a surprised and admiring look. It was the kind of knowledge only old rural folks usually had. He hadn't expected me to have such a strong grasp of daily survival. And for the first time, some of the hostility in the audience's eyes faded. But I didn't care. I kept my eyes locked on Julia, watching her every move on the screen. Soon, we reached the first major turning point. The first day of school. My biological parents scoffed. Julia is a born scholar. She was never meant to live like a servant. Once she starts school, everything will change. But on screen, Julia waited from sunrise until sunset. And still, no one from the village committee came to notify her. Unable to hold back, she approached her foster mother and asked, "Mom, why can't I go to school like the other kids?" Her foster mother shoved her aside harshly and barked, "Go to school? What a waste of money." Absolutely not. Chapter 4. No one had expected things to take such a turn. Everyone turned to look at me, but I was the only one who didn't seem surprised in the slightest. After all, my foster mother was the type of person who thought even feeding me was a waste. There was no way she'd spend money to send me to school. My brother immediately frowned and snapped. "But didn't you go to school back then? Why not, Julia? What did you do to pull it off?" I really couldn't stand the righteous tone he used. As if I owed their family $1 million or something. I rolled my eyes and replied irritably, "Do you think it's easy for a girl in the countryside to go to school? If you don't fight for it yourself, who's going to help you?" Julia, raised in luxury from birth, of course had no such awareness. She just assumed that once she reached the right age, everything would be arranged for her. I continued. Back then, when I was out working in the fields harvesting wheat, I also helped the village committee members with their own fields a few times. That's why they helped persuade my mom, saying that if I studied, I could bring in more money for the family. It was only because of that I got the chance to go to school. As soon as I said that, voices from the audience chimed in agreement. She's right. I'm from a village too. At first my mom didn't want to send me to school either. But we had relatives in the committee, and they finally convinced her. Julia, completely unprepared, could only continue suffering in that hellish household until the government issued a mandate. All children of school age had to receive compulsory education, or their guardians would be fined. Only then did her foster mother reluctantly take Julia to enroll. But she didn't pay a cent of her school expenses. Uniform fees, textbook fees, none of it. Julia had to climb the mountain every day with a basket on her back, collecting medicinal herbs to sell at the town market. And since the school was far from home, she had to leave several hours early just to get there. She wore through multiple pairs of shoes, but had no money to buy new ones. She thought school would be her chance to defy fate. But between studying, working, and long treks back and forth, she barely had time to rest. She often fell asleep in class, and she couldn't understand a word of what the teacher was saying. By the end of the semester, she ranked at the very bottom of the class. Add to that her tattered clothes, and hardly anyone wanted to be friends with her. Bit by bit, she started to lose hope. Right on cue, voices from the audience came to her defense again. Honestly, she's doing well, just not going insane. Why are we even stressing about grades? Julia's just a regular person. After all, her birth parents nodded quickly. Exactly. Julia was raised for the business world from the start. Of course she's not great at academics. That's understandable. But the host seemed to enjoy going against them. He smiled and said, "Well, that may be true, but our real heiress managed to achieve excellent grades in the same environment." As he finished speaking, bright, colorful certificates of achievement lit up the big screen, smacking them all square in the face. Chapter 5. Soon, the second turning point arrived. The school announced an art competition. Entries could be submitted in any form. At once, my birth parents straightened up in their seats. Our Julia was born for the arts. They declared, "This is it. She'll finally return to the life that was meant for her." Julia seemed to think so too. She secretly signed up for several events behind her foster mother's back. But during the drawing contest, her hands trembled badly. After all, Hands that had spent months gripping a sickle could no longer draw a straight line, let alone paint delicate shadows and details. When she tried dancing, her skin, exposed in the thin costume, was covered in bruises and welts. The judges took one glance and waved her off. She wasn't even given a chance to perform. Finally came the piano performance. Julia, who had only ever touched a piano in school classes, nervously played a simple beginner piece. She looked up at the judges, eyes full of hope, but they shook their heads and sighed. You clearly have talent for the piano, but it seems you've never received formal training. Unfortunately, there are many people in this world more talented than you, and far more hardworking. Just like that, Julia was eliminated again. The audience murmured in dismay. How can this be? Julia's so gifted. It's all that woman's fault. She's not even human. I chuckled and nodded. Exactly. That's why she swapped Julia for me. My words struck a chord with the audience. After all, that woman was Julia's biological mother. There was no life stolen from Julia. If anything, I was the one who had my life stolen. The crowd fell into a heavy silence. Still, deep down, they couldn't help hoping Julia would rise up and fight back. And she did, encouraged by the judge's comment about her talent. She mustered the courage to ask her foster mother to enroll her in after-school classes. She wanted to pursue art, but what she got in return was yet another brutal beating. The audience, who had been hoping Julia would preserve her inner light despite the mud, were slapped in the face once again, because Julia, afraid of more beatings, gave in once more. It was as if her mind had been rewired. She began to believe she didn't deserve anything good. Day after day, she numbly repeated the cycle of school and labor. Her behavior became more and more like that of a typical rural girl. I could see the disappointment in my birth parents' eyes. Of course, business people are the most selfish of all. They don't care about having biological children. What they want is a well-trained, elite product they can use for profit. Still, Julia wasn't stupid. She didn't stay down for long. Soon, she pulled herself together. She realized that if she wanted to escape this swamp, she'd have to rely on academics to change her fate. By now, Julia was in her final year of high school, preparing for the National College Entrance Exam. She stayed up reading late every night, finished her chores before dawn, and ran to school just to squeeze in a few extra minutes of study. Her grades did start to improve, slowly but steadily. Everyone thought, maybe this time, she'd finally turn things around. Then, out of nowhere, her foster mother prepared a massive meal. Meat, fish, color, aroma, everything. It was the most extravagant spread Julia had seen in her entire life. She was confused, yet couldn't help swallowing her saliva. The audience buzzed. What's going on? Did that woman suddenly grow a conscience? Maybe she finally realized Julia has real potential for the college exam? But only I knew. Her foster mother's intentions were far darker than that. After Julia finished eating, drums and gongs exploded outside. A red bridal sedan was carried into the yard. An old man in a groom's robe exchanged a grin with her foster mother. Then the woman shoved Julia's shoulder and said, "Go on, time to leave with your future husband." Chapter 6. Julia instantly realized what was happening. She screamed and tried to run, but a few burly men forced her into the red bridal sedan. The audience gasped in horror. They turned to me, shocked. People still sell their daughters like this? Did this happen to you too? I calmly nodded. Yes, my foster mother tried to marry me off to a 70-year-old man, because he offered 20,000 yuan as a bride price. My birth mother frowned and looked at me with veiled contempt. You agreed to that? Have you no shame? I smiled at her. This woman who always judged me without knowing the details. I had no choice. If I refused, I wouldn't have been allowed to take the college entrance exam. Back then, I was the top scorer in the city. The mayor came to fetch me personally. So in the end, I never had to marry him. The room fell silent. After all, with Julia's grades now, the best she could hope for was an average university. There was no way someone would come save her. But Julia, unwilling to surrender, resisted, and had her legs broken. She was dragged off to her husband's home. She never even got the chance to take the exam. Time flew by. The day of the identity reveal finally came. Julia was rescued, but by then, she already carried the full air of a tired housewife. When my birth mother saw her, she couldn't hide the disgust on her face. Not a trace of pity could be found. Still, she didn't make things difficult. She paid for Julia to attend piano, chess, calligraphy, and painting classes again. But years of harsh labor had wrecked Julia's body. One by one, the teachers gently declined to teach her, having never tasted a good life before. Julia quickly drowned herself in the lure of wealth. She abandoned all the resources the family provided. Instead, she caked on heavy makeup and spent her nights partying at clubs. The family was fed up. They cut off her credit cards. But right around then, Julia met a male model. Having never experienced kindness, she was easily fooled by his sweet words. She gave him everything. He even demanded 5 million yuan. Julia didn't hesitate. She handed over all her living expenses. When that wasn't enough, she started stealing money for him. Her parents soon found out. Just like that, Julia, who had finally been brought back into a wealthy family, was kicked out once again. This time, no one would take her back. Stained by bad habits and ruined by desperation, Julia eventually froze to death beneath an overpass. Quietly, anonymously, on a random winter day, the screen suddenly went dark. Julia's consciousness snapped back into her body. She gasped for breath, as if she hadn't adjusted to living through an entire lifetime. Desperately, she looked to her family and fiancé for help. But this time, every single one of them avoided her eyes. The host stood up and declared, "Miss Julia has failed her challenge. Now, it's the real heiress's turn." As he spoke, my consciousness began to lift from my body and entered Julia's former life. Once again, the big screen lit up. Chapter 7. I became Julia. At that moment, I was standing in an opulent hall, surrounded by wealth and elegance. My mother was introducing me to the piano teacher standing before us. I kept the same blank expression, as if nothing around me could spark even a hint of interest. Still, I didn't refuse. I practiced every piece the teacher gave me with quiet diligence. Unfortunately, after just one lesson, the teacher approached my mother. Politely, he said, "Your daughter is certainly very diligent, but she doesn't seem to have much talent. Her style is too rigid. I recommend letting her study something else." Upon hearing this, my mother's eyes darkened with disappointment, and the audience watching below nodded knowingly, as if confirming their expectations. But I frowned slightly. That same day, instead of enjoying my usual leisure time, I locked myself in the piano room. If I played a piece wrong once, I practiced it 10 times. If 10 times wasn't enough, I practiced it 100 times. By the end of the day, even my mother could hear the change in the music, and was utterly stunned. She immediately called the piano teacher back. When he listened, he too was shocked. He asked in disbelief, "How did you manage to grasp the emotion of the piece in just one day?" I replied calmly, "I memorized the rhythm, melody, and the emotion of the performer, then replicated it." The teacher was left speechless. Even so, I didn't continue learning piano. The teacher admitted that while I might not be musically gifted in the traditional sense, my ability to learn and replicate was extraordinary. He said I was bound for something greater. My mother took his advice seriously and enrolled me in various feminine courses: floral arrangement, calligraphy, dance, painting, but I had no talent for any of them. Eventually, even my mother started to feel discouraged. One day, while returning from running errands, I passed a folding table on the street where an old man was playing Go. He declared to the crowd, "Anyone who can beat me and solve this unsolvable puzzle will win 1,000 yuan. Many people stepped up to try, but all of them lost. The old man grinned confidently. For some reason, despite being the pampered daughter of a wealthy family, I found myself strangely drawn to that money. Having watched for quite a while, I had gradually begun to see through the puzzle, so I sat across from the old man, and within just a few moves, I solved the deadlock in one. The old man's face darkened. He forced a smile. "You've seen this puzzle before, haven't you? Where's the fun in cheating?" Expressionless, I shook my head. This is my first time playing Go. It was then that I realized I had an exceptional gift for logical thinking. In school, I had no weak subjects. In fact, I could solve problems at a college level before even finishing high school. One day, when I returned home holding a gold medal from a provincial academic competition, my parents finally started seeing me in a new light. Up until then, they had focused all their resources on my older brother, planning for him to inherit the family business, while grooming me to marry well and form alliances. But now, they began to consider me as a successor too. My achievements gradually made my brother feel threatened, but after witnessing my software development and operational skills, even he had to acknowledge my capabilities. Soon, everyone in the business world knew our family had two exceptional heirs. Both were destined to shine in the corporate arena, and right at that moment, our family discovered that I was the wrong daughter. Chapter 8. The audience began to protest, convinced the show must be rigged. Otherwise, how could Julia's and my lives turn out so drastically different? The host scratched his head awkwardly. The company's tech can't malfunction or be bought, he explained. Both young ladies kept their original personalities, so what you're seeing is simply the life each would have lived had they never been switched. That made sense. It was the company's flagship product. If there were bias, it certainly wouldn't lean in my favor. On screen, I, still in Julia's body, laughed at the idea of being the fake daughter. Shame washed over me. After all, the swap hadn't been an accident. My birth mother, a former nanny, had done it on purpose. When I saw Julia standing there, battered and humiliated, my guilt only deepened. So when my birth mother suggested I stay, I shook my head without hesitation. Julia asked shyly, "Big sister, are you leaving because I came back?" "Don't worry, I won't fight you for anything." I smiled and shook my head, facing the family's tangled emotions. I said, "This wasn't an accident. My biological mother deliberately switched us, stealing more than 10 years of Julia's life. If I stay, that would be unfair to her." Then I turned to Julia. "I'm not leaving because you returned. This life is rightfully yours. If you wish, you can sue my birth mother." Julia looked surprised, but I offered no further explanation. "I'm not a sentimental person. Wrongdoing must be punished. That's all." Back home, when my birth mother learned I planned to help Julia sue her, she pointed at my nose and screamed, "Ungrateful! Without me you'd never have lived so well. I did it for you." I simply replied, "Mistakes come with consequences. After you're released, I'll still support you financially, rest assured." My ability spoke for itself. Those in high society who'd waited to watch me crash and burn lost interest when they saw I was fine. The people who valued my talent, on the other hand, reached out with offers. I soon earned my first serious capital, then used my management skills to launch my own company. With most of my savings, I repaid the parents who had raised me. Thanking them for all those years, they were moved to tears and insisted on becoming investors in my firm. The company flourished, eventually rivaling my birth family's conglomerate. I proved that real gold shines anywhere. In any environment, value will reveal itself. And my birth mother? With my help, Julia sued her, and she went to prison to face the sentence she deserved. Chapter 9. After my career took off, I found myself unconsciously keeping an eye on Julia's situation. I discovered that her life after returning home was far from good, though our parents wanted to train her. Julia, having endured years of hard labor and abuse, had long lost the ability to learn music, painting, or etiquette. As for making a name for herself in the business world like I did, that was out of the question. Her mediocrity disappointed the family deeply. Eventually, they began discussing using her for a political marriage, squeezing out whatever last bit of value she had. When I found Julia, I asked her directly, "Do you want to live your own life, free from anyone's control?" Julia froze for a moment, then nodded like crazy. She told me she felt uncomfortable at home. Everyone seemed to look down on her. Even the maids treated her with suspicion. She confessed she'd almost been sold off to an old man by her foster mother. So when her birth mother suggested marriage for the family's gain, it felt like nothing had changed. She was still trapped in the same nightmare. Everything was terrifying. Looking at the fear in Julia's eyes, a wave of sorrow welled up in me. She felt like another version of myself, and I had to save her. Fortunately, I had more than enough resources. I brought Julia to live with me. hired tutors for her, and personally taught her everything I knew about business. I passed on all my knowledge to her without holding anything back. At the end, I told her, women need independence. Only then can we live freely, without being controlled by anyone. Maybe because we were the same age, or because of the unbreakable bond between us. Julia came to trust me deeply. Under my guidance, she grew steadily more independent, absorbing knowledge quickly. I invested in her first venture, her very first business deal. When she earned her first real income, she used most of it to treat me to what she thought was the best food in the world. Soon, no one remembered she had once been a shabby little village girl. Everyone called us the most iconic sister duo in the business world. With her newfound independence, Julia finally escaped the fate of an arranged marriage. She began traveling abroad, forming partnerships, and building a radiant life of her own. Not long after, she met someone overseas, a man who truly loved her. Ecstatic, she told me the news and invited me to her wedding. I accepted. At the ceremony, I saw Julia glowing with happiness, a world away from the timid girl she had once been. I smiled too, filled with relief. After helping Julia, I returned to my work. But from time to time, I still visited my birth mother in prison. At first, she greeted me with anger, but over time, she quieted down. Eventually, she began chattering about her life in prison, how much labor she did today, what rewards she earned, and one day, she looked at me and burst into tears, sobbing. She said, "I was wrong. I did it because I hated the rich. I wanted to switch you and Julia, and then vent my hatred by abusing that innocent child. Please, don't hate me." I smiled softly, calm and composed, because honestly, I had never truly hated this woman. I was relieved she'd finally recognized her wrongdoing. She was still my mother, and I didn't want her to remain a person who hurt others without remorse. I kept my promise. After her release, I gave her the best environment to retire in peace. Finally, when I reached the peak of success, standing on the stage receiving my award in the business world, everything went black. My consciousness was pulled back into reality. The host excitedly announced my victory, and the crowd erupted into thunderous applause. Chapter 10. I won the contest. There was no doubt about that. According to the rules, everything that once belonged to Julia should now be mine. But I refused. Long before the competition, I had already given up on this family's affection. I entered only for myself. There was a time I'd questioned my worth. Why does every relative dislike me? Am I really that inadequate? Living Julia's life helped me regain confidence. I am who I am, and no one should dictate my value. After the show, my parents and brother looked at me with deep remorse. Their attitude had spun a full 360 degrees. Mother murmured, "We're sorry. We never knew you'd suffered so much. We'll make it up to you." I shook my head and declined to go home with them. I knew these people cared only about profit. They wanted me back because they'd seen my achievements on screen. I would never again let anyone pull my strings. Mother, disappointed but powerless, managed a final line. "Home will always be your harbor. Come back whenever you wish." My former fiancé, who'd once despised me, suddenly began pursuing me, showering me with declarations of love. I never took him seriously. My heart is set on building wealth. I can support myself and need no man to lean on. His failed courtship soon turned him into a social punchline. Because the contest was live-streamed, many witnessed my abilities and showered me with invitations and partnerships. Everything seemed to echo that alternate life. I kept growing, kept asserting my independence, finishing the life that was always meant to be mine, by myself. Julia, meanwhile, could no longer stay in that household. Once her true nature was exposed, the family's affection vanished. All she really had was a middling piano skill from years of privileged lessons. She survived by tutoring rich kids, enduring their sneers. The money was never enough. Used to spending freely, she couldn't adjust to an ordinary budget and juggled multiple jobs just to scrape by. This time, I chose not to help her. Years of coddling at the Song family had warped her character, beyond anything I could fix. As for my foster mother, her baby swap and abuse were exposed online. Netizens united to send her to prison. She cursed us all, showing no remorse. In the simulation, I had visited her daily until she repented. But Julia, consumed by hatred, blamed her foster mother for everything and never once visited, much less cared for her. Watching it all unfold, I felt no turbulence. I simply kept building my life, unmoved by outsiders, bound by no one. Life offers countless crossroads. Only by staying true to oneself can one reach the end. I have faced confusion and struggle, but I never gave up, and that made all the difference.